This morning is from an international speaker, Mr. Lars Klüver. And to introduce him, the President of CHASS, Professor Sue Willis.
Yes, it's my very great pleasure this morning to welcome Lars Klüver, Director of the Danish Board of Technology. This is a non-profit organisation undertaking policy-oriented technology assessment, contributing to knowledge-based and collaborative decision-making. Lars has 25 years' experience, and his work focuses on interactive methodologies involving those who need knowledge, who have stakes at play, and who need solutions that work, which I guess means all of us really. Recently, he initiated the Worldwide Views, a global citizen participation alliance that brought 100 citizen groups together in 38 countries around issues of the climate and to inform the UN Climate Summit. I could go on, but I'm not going to go on. I think you can all read what's in the brochure. He has many achievements. At present, he's the distinguished international visitor to the HC Cumes Policy Forum at the ANU. We thank them for his contribution, and we thank him for his contribution. He's going to talk to us this morning on embracing the human and social dimensions of technology and innovation. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you, Jules. Thank you for inviting me. Exciting. I hope you're awake, because it will be kind of a start takeoff like this. And what I'm trying to do, is to give you an idea of, on the one hand, of how we practically can work with the issue that on the one hand we have the world is very complicated, and on the other hand we attack it very simply. I hope I get that message through. So if I don't, then put a lot of questions to me afterwards, because Jules, look a little impatient if I'm using too much time, because we need to have some time for discussions as well. Well, first I want to get some terms right, because I'm going to use some words, and those are words that people put very different things into. Let's just take technology. I use a very broad concept of technology. It's hardware as we know it, the thing here. But it's also the thing that's in it, software. But software is more than the thing that's in this. Software is also the manuals we have, the rules we have, the laws we have about how this should work. Software is procedures, rules as well. And then it's orgware, the whole system of organizations, institutions, grassroots organizations, and things like that around such a thing as telephones, as internet, and so on. So technology is the whole thing. It's how we organize ourselves around technology. So then you say, okay, what is this, the device? What do I call that? I call that a technique. That's my name for that. Technology is the whole system around it. Okay, and innovation. I use the word innovation as the process that makes this quite complicated big thing called technology. So that is, of course, the invention process, development, design, also architecture of systems, for example, and also making, deployment, and management systems. So it's just, I use these words quite widely and that's necessary. Okay, what is it we do when we solve problems? We often use this scheme. We set up some research, science, and that should lead to innovation. And then again, that should lead to some technology. And technology goes on to the market, can be used for a lot of things, will solve our problems. We also sometimes put a little red thing on top, which is called problems. And when we do that, then we call it strategic research or strategic innovation. It's not always we do that. That's an extra. If we want more technology, then we invest a little more in these two. And that's what we call the linear model. It's very simple, and I hope I can explain that now, because there's another way to attack these things. The same question, how do we solve problems? That's the fuzzy model. Here we have problems and solutions. They interact. When we make a solution, we make new problems. You have heard the saying that a solution is just exchanging one problem with another one. And so there's a tight relation between solutions and problems. Technology comes in there. Technology can have a red upper side of it, which is the problem side, and a green side of it, the low one, which is the problem side. So technology is not only a solution, it's also a problem. It fits in the relation between problems and solutions. So we invest in innovation in order to get these this working, the whole thing about problems and solutions. And we look at the problems with research. We investigate problems with research. Sometimes, and you can see the arrow is quite thin, sometimes research leads to innovation. And this is where this is very different from the linear model. In the linear model, we postulate that it's research that makes innovation. But I think in the fuzzy model, we have to say that sometimes research leads to innovation. Innovation can come from many other places. And that works even better if we have feedback loops from the research about the problems. Then it begins to be a little more probable that research will lead to innovation. Okay, it's already a little complicated, but now it gets worse. Because all this happens in a blue sky called society. And in society we have such a thing as culture, for example. Now we begin to talk about the human dimension. We have culture, and culture relates to all of these things. What we research in is dependent on our culture, how we understand problems, what we see as solution, are dependent upon our cultures. We don't do these things equally the same way across the globe. We do it differently. And we also have something called economy. And economy relates to innovation. We invest heavily in innovation. Why? Because we want to have things we can put on the market and be competitive. It also relates to the problems, because many of the problems are there because we try to make economy. So, and again, you know, there's something called research policy, so of course economy also relates how much we can invest in research. And those two, culture and economy, ends up with a lot of actors and agents out there. They are people with values, opinions, visions, interests, relations, roles. They are institutions. They are trying to influence this whole thing so it fits their values, interests, and all that. And it gets worse, because on the other end, there are citizens, users, and victims of the development. They are those who have the wishes, the needs, the dreams, the hope, the problems, the risks, the benefits, and so on. And they are highly influenced by everything that goes on this scheme. And because they are that, they also have opinions. And what can citizens do? They can elect. So they influence our democracy and our politics, and the politics influence the whole scheme up there, and also influence how actors work. This is not only complicated, this scheme is incredibly ugly. And I will remedy that later. If we want more solutions, here, isn't it nice? Turns around. And then, where should we begin solving our problems? Where should we attack in this complicated system if we want to make solutions? This scheme is what I sometimes meet when I talk with humanists and with social scientists. And it comes up now and then as, but Lars, everything is connected. So everything is connected. And if we try to work, it will look like this. So the linear model definitely escapes in the social societal reality. It is too simple, but it's very easy to use. The fuzzy model includes everything, but, as I said, say to the point of despair. How are we going to use it at all? It's too complicated. So what it ends up is that we talk about the fuzzy when you use the linear. And that has consequences. This is my compensation. Isn't it a nice picture? It's not as ugly as the model. It's a little piece of art. But I will come up with 3 examples of consequences. But you can add thousands of them yourself. You know about these kinds of results of looking too simply at technology. One thing is the focus in traffic innovation. What is it we focus on? We try to make a more effective car, a more effective signal system and we try to make better and more stable roads and things like that. What we haven't focused on really is to make a sustainable and culturally well integrated traffic system. That has not really been developed yet. I've never been there, but I've heard Singapore is trying to do it. But I don't think any people in Singapore would say they have it. It can be done. If you talk with traffic planners and you say, we have made modeling about sustainable transportation for Denmark, it can be made. And it's economically very good because we don't then have to import a lot of oil and invest in a lot of private cars. We can have a much better transport system and we would earn a lot of money on it. It can be done, but it's not done. And my postulate is that's because we look too simply on, we have a too simple model to attack it. And that means that we have reduced social life. It's a guy called Dick Glow in a book called Technology and Democracy. He explains what happened to the front porch in American houses when cars began to dominate. In the beginning, the front porch was a place where you were sitting, having your coffee, your lunch, and so on. People were walking on the street, and you said, "Hi, come in, get a cup of coffee." So it was a place which was a center for social contact in the local community. And then the cars came, the pavement were taken away, and the road was expanded, and there was so much noise on the road that the front porch isn't used anymore. You go into your house and watch television instead. And so looking too simply on this, on traffic, has social consequences. So it influences life life quality, of course, CO2 reduction, the balance between weak and strong traffic users. Many cities in this world where people do not bicycle because it's simply too dangerous. So many traffic kills threat to mobility in the long run, I would also say. It uses enormous amounts of energy, the traffic system we have, and unless the systems are changed, we will probably not be able to have the same mobility in the future. Another example, e-government. This little thing up there that you cannot read is a copy I made of the Danish tax authorities page about the amount of money you can retract from your income before salary is calculated if you have a handcraftsman coming and making, work on your house. And even me, who is, kind of a bureaucratic biologist, I have difficulty reading that page. I would have difficulty using it. That's one thing, that the language is still bureaucratic in these e-government systems. But also just the fact that they are ICT-based and probably leaves a very large proportion of people outside those systems. And what happens then when we close down call centers, when we make it impossible for people to meet up and solve these things with the authorities directly? Well, what happens? They're just left outside. They don't use any systems then. But also we're beginning to have a new problem with e-gov systems, which is that even the sharp ICT users cannot use them. All these youngsters here, you're very good at playing games. You know your computer, but you probably don't know the jargon of bureaucratic language. And if you don't meet people who can learn you that, because you simply talk with them and you can put questions to them, if you only meet bureaucracy like this, then you will never understand it. So we're beginning to have bureaucratic illiterates. And what then happens? They just stop using the system. If you don't understand this, then you just do what you want to do and you don't care and say, okay, they can contact me if they want something from me. I'm not going to use that thing. So we have people who use it, who are in the system, and then we have people who don't give a damn to the system, just ignores it because they cannot find out using it, which is not how we want it to be. My third example is surveillance. How relevant the investments we make in developing surveillance technology really are. As I said, security tech is not made and deployed with the rights of citizens in focus. In Denmark, it's even like we have put up, like in Britain, I think Britain is the country in the world who has the most surveillance cameras. It's incredible what they have. But I think Denmark is catching up. And it's in two months ago or so, the police authorities in Copenhagen said they would not put up any surveillance cameras anymore because now they've had a research project and it showed what many of us had said for many years. It simply showed that surveillance does not reduce criminality. It just moves it. I mean, if you want to break into a house, you don't take the one with the camera, you take the neighbor instead. You don't walk home and say, I'm not going to make a break-in. So it's quite obvious. But that's not thought of in the development of these technologies. And also, when we put more of these technologies up, of course we get a more panoptic society. People are think of as looked upon all the time and things like that. I think that has real big consequences. I think it increases and the distance between the state and the citizen. You don't feel like the state is your friend anymore. It's the mother or father watching you all the time instead, which is not a nice feeling of having mothers and fathers watching one all of the time. And I also think that it's based on the whole idea, which is not true, that needs to be a trade-off. There is a trade-off between privacy and security. Why is it we cannot make security and still defend privacy? Of course we can. But this is taken granted because of a very simple way of looking at this technology. I think the panoptic society is becoming a real issue, and I think that will make a conform society. Because if you have the feeling that everybody can watch you all of the time, and everything you do will be remembered, then you don't do the things you won't be remembered for. And that I think, leads to conformity. And conformity is non-innovative, and it's not fun. So, oversimplifying tech issues makes serious trouble for us. It means that we solve the wrong problems, get the wrong results. We do not handle the uncertainties that are embedded in all the technological systems. We just ignore them if we oversimplify things. And I also think that we have a tendency to exaggerate the role of science in how technology should work in our societies and work. It's also, if we ignore the way people use technologies and we only focus on making technologies, then I think we exaggerate the role of science in society. And the last one here maybe should have some words. I also think there's a tendency with the reduce these complexities to ethics. So whenever someone say, well, it shouldn't only be technology and technology systems, another one says, no, there is also ethics. But this is not only about ethics. It's about how technology should work in our societies. It's about making better technology for me. And that cannot be exported to the word ethics. I'm not saying that ethics are not important. I'm saying that there are important things that it doesn't embrace. And so the whole idea is just attaching ethics to the discussion about technology, and then everything is solved. Forget about it. It's not. So it leads to ineffective solutions, and I also think it leads to wasted opportunities if we oversimplify tech issues. I will give you an example of how it can be done. Surprisingly, it's made by my own organization. This is how Denmark looks now. It's on top of Europe, on top of you have Germany below, and then you have Norway and Sweden on top, Iceland over there, Britain over there, Russia over there. And if water levels increase 10 meters, then it looks like this. and that's the worst case IPCC scenario. So that's interesting, isn't it? Copenhagen is, now I need the laser pointer, is the island there. So at the island and inside the big island there, so it's on the left side on the U-shaped island, and it will nearly disappear. This is not good. So we're talking a lot about climate adaptation in Denmark, and we made a project about that. What we did was we worked together with the municipality, Kalundborg, which is on the left side of the right island. What we did was we invited farmers, NGOs, municipality, politicians, experts, a lot of people into 3 days scenario workshop, where they made some rough scenarios of how they wanted climate adaptation to be made in their municipality. These rough scenarios, they were checked for errors, for feasibility by the National Geological Surveys and an engineering company. And then the same participants met at a workshop later, and they improved these scenarios, made them more detailed, argued for the different aspects of the scenarios. And the whole problem they were to solve is how are we going to prioritize in Kalundborg municipality the way we're going to deal with climate adaptation. They have nature there, they have very big summer house areas, they have a big harbor there, and all of these things will be threatened by ocean rise. And they cannot do all of it, they cannot save all of it, so they have to prioritize. So the whole thing was, how can we make a clever way of prioritizing? And the scenario workshop was the beginning of that process. Then we made what we call a citizen summit. 500 citizens were gathered in one day. Oh, by the way, just look at the 2 maps on the right side. This is not the 10-meter scenario. This is the 1.5. This is the 20 years event on the 1.5 meter scenario, which is what we can expect in the next 100 years. So, I mean, in the next 100 years, half of Kalundborg city will be flooded each 20 years. The little lake you see on the lower map, to the right on the lower map called Tisø, that's an important water reservoir for Copenhagen. That will be flooded with salt water each 20 years. So we're talking about real issues here. Back to the Citizen Summit. We gathered 500 citizens in one day. They went through a thematic program coupled to these scenarios. And in each theme, they had first an introduction to the theme. They got some material first, written material. They could prepare themselves from home. But in each theme, they also got some introduction to the theme. Then they deliberated at tables. And there was a politician sitting at each table discussing with them or managing the discussion at the table. And in the end, they prioritized different solutions. So they simply voted with electronic voting things. They voted on different questions. And the results they made through that was they wanted an action plan now. They wanted a full scheme of how to deal with climate change, how to adapt to climate change in Kalundborg. They wanted a proactive transformation, and they wanted to phase out vulnerable settlements and let nature take over. That is, the last one there, is an extremely controversial decision. And therefore, it was extremely important that it was the citizens who took it and not the politicians. It means, in practical life, that there are summer house areas with very expensive summer houses, where whenever they begin to build those summer houses, they will not allow them to be renewed. They will be taken down instead, and the person who has this summer house area will get a piece of land in another place that will not be flooded. So they will slowly dismantle these summer house areas, let nature take over, and make summer house areas in another place, which is, you can imagine, a politically very complicated thing to do. The citizens wanted that to happen. Here is here's what it looks in reality. At each table, there's a politician sitting there. You cannot see it, but this I don't know what is speaker's table or whatever you call that. You cannot see that. There's a little glass with bonbons, very large ones. We call them shut-up bonbons. They are so big that if you get in their mouth, you cannot speak. And the shut-up bonbons, they are used for the politicians at the tables if they talk too much. So there's one politician here who talks a lot. That's the guy here. That's the mayor of Kalundborg, and he's getting interviewed to Danish television about this. They were extremely happy for this process, and one interesting thing is it paid off at once. I think the price for such a process was 2 to 3 million Danish kroner, which is comparable to 500,000 Australian dollars. That sounds like a lot of money. But one of the decisions they took after this was that they did not make a sewer system for one of the summer house areas, because this area was going in 50 years to be abolished. So they saved 25 million for this sewer system. I mean, in one day. So it is not expensive, in fact. If you get to these kind of results, you save a lot of money, and that I think that is something you can say in general about these kind of processes. So, what had happened if we had used the linear model or the simplified model here? That is done in many other municipalities in Copenhagen and in Denmark, so we know how it works. The first thing they do is they ask some engineering company to say which areas and infrastructures are threatened. Well, what tax solution can you provide? Can you make a little report about that? And then the fight begins. Then they begin to fight about who should have a dam or a dike in front of the summer house area, who should have a new pumping system to pump the water out when it goes up, and all this. So there's just a fight. It's a simple power game. Those who are strongest will get the things, and those who are not will not. And then later, of course, they get surprised when all the neglected and unforeseen problems pops up. And that can end up being very, very expensive because no real prioritization process went on. And they didn't involve people in that. So so the linear model, the simplified model in this system can be very, very expensive and will give many surprises. So here we have the societal cloud again. What I want to get at is that there are ways of dealing with this, on the one hand very simple way of attacking, and on the other hand very, very complicated system. We can find, as we call, the golden middle road. There is somewhere in between, and that is which we should use depends on the situation. I would also say what I want to get at here is that the level of inclusion that we need then also depends on the situation. For example, there are some problems in this world which are simply technical. There's no reason that we make a 500 persons meeting to discuss how a little plastic thing and other little plastic things should be. So when we have a technical problem, the complexity is not very big, and we don't need very big inclusion. So science and techniques, of course, still have their role. I'm not saying they don't. But when you have a strategic problem, the complexity is a little higher, and we need a little more inclusion. That might be so that we need some transdisciplinary working groups or something like that. When we have a problem where something is on stake, where someone will win and some will lose, when we need a negotiation, then inclusion has to be larger. And that's typically where we begin to put commissions like situations in. Doesn't need to be very complex issues, but just the fact that power is a game means that we need to put negotiation into place. And when we have wicked problems, which are problems where no one really knows how to make the perfect solution, there's a lot of uncertainties, and when we have put a solution in place, there's still also uncertainties about how that will work at all. We have to be pragmatic there, we have to find common ground. Inclusion, and very big inclusion, is really needed. And my example from Kalundborg municipality is one of those. And this looks complicated, but it's a huge simplification. Because, for example, you can see on this one that technological development, I've made that as a straight line. It is not. Technological development is, very, very chaotic. But one thing you can say is that it starts with some kind of idea, and it ends with a technological system which is so old that we have to renew it, called reshaping. And in between, we have different phases. My point with this slide is that because these different phases deals with different problems, we have to use different methods or processes to deal with them. For example, in the beginning, we need to develop our innovation system. Technology foresight methodologies are good at that. Then we might need to find some goals with the development. For example, nanotechnology. What are we going to use it for? For everything, or are we going to select something? If we're going to select something, then the consensus conference is not bad at that. It's a very good methodology for selecting opportunities for the future. At some point, we need social technical strategies. So we need, for example, to decide if we should build special institutions around the technology or something like that. For that, expert and stakeholder work groups, self-managing work groups, which means that they don't have terms of reference which limits what they can do. That's the self-managing in it. These kind of methods are very good at that. And at some point, the technology shows up to give problems, and we need to make regulation around it. A parliamentary hearing, which is also an interactive methodology, is good at that. Later, we need social embedding, because we found out that even the rules cannot solve it. Just think of traffic. It's not the traffic rules that make people work well in traffic. It's actually that they comply to a traffic culture. So there's something which is called culture around each technology. And if we want that to be developed, and we want that to work, and to discuss that, then a scenario workshop is not bad at that. And at some point, this whole technological system is so closed and old. Think of the train systems in Europe. Incredible. And we have to reinvent them. We need to have reshaping processes, which means power games among actors, because they are also very old and strong. And we have a very conflictual methodology, interactive methodology, which is called Future Search, which is very good at that. My point here is, because the challenges are different along that line, technology development, we have to use different methods. So, this slide just shows a selection of different methods that have been tested very much in this for these kind of activities, interactive activities. Situations where we invite different actors, put them through different processes, and we do that consciously. We try to use the methods which works well best for the specific situation. These methods are not panaceas. They do not solve all problems, but they are better than using the simplified version. And I also think these methods cannot work alone. There's something called adaptations. You have to change the method now and then to make them fit. You can make hybrids, you can build them together. And also there's something called projects, which is not the same as methods. So you can have a bigger project, like the one I told you about, this Kalundborg, where we started with a scenario workshop, and then we made a citizen summit. So you can build with them like Lego. Okay. So what is it that we should do if we want such a system to work? If we want more interactivity and to embrace the human and social dimensions in that way? First of all, I think we should begin to learn to focus on the challenges and not on the technologies. We should not start some of these processes by saying, let's take a look at biotechnology. For me, that's not interesting. We should take a look at how we want to make food for our citizens, for example, good food or something. Start with the challenge. Don't start with technology. Secondly, I think politicians should learn to be a little patient now and then. Take a time out. Okay, this is complicated. Time out. Let's make some process, and then let's continue the discussions afterwards. So we need to have functions in our democracies where we politicians look in each other's eyes and say, shouldn't we just consider this a little more and invite some more people to take part of that consideration? I also think we need to have trust in process competence. We need to use people who have that competence more, and look a little less to the side of those who have the competence in the technologies. So begin to put new experts on the scene who are thinking in processes and not in solutions. I think that's very important. I think we have to believe in collaborative democracy. We have to rest our case on the, or to, that was, I think, bad English. We have to trust or to believe in our democracies in the way so that we use them more, we will get better solutions. There is a tendency now in this financial crisis, during the financial crisis in Denmark, which I think is a country that uses these processes quite much. But even now we have a tendency that when the crises get bigger, we do the opposite of what we should. We should begin to talk more together. We should begin to have more processes in society. That's not what's happening. Politicians are instead trying to be very strong and take fast decisions. And what comes out of that? Two simple decisions. So we have to believe in collaborative democracy, and the worse the situation gets, the more important it is. That takes time. We have to get used to this. It's not something that we can just develop for tomorrow. We have to learn to develop it. I also think the mainstreaming of such a thing comes through examples. We cannot just implement that everywhere. We have to make good examples, and through the good examples, people will begin to take them up and use them themselves. So mainstreaming comes through good examples, I think. And also, I think that it takes special institutions. With institutions here, I don't necessarily mean a budget of its own, a house of its own, and so on. It can be networks or something, but it takes specialized institutions to drive it. It's a profession. That's also what I said, and trust in the process competence. The process competence has to be there, and it's a profession. And we have to build that up. So the final slide here. I think it's absolutely possible to embrace the social and human dimension of technology if we want to. I think we can deal with it, and we can deal with complexity through interaction. At least we can deal with it much better than we do by simplifying things. I think we have to have a problem-oriented agenda then. We shouldn't focus on the technology push, we focus on the demands we have for solutions. And I think we need to have a situation-sensitive approach, an elaborated methodology, specialized, and I think independent institutions who are not seen from the beginning of as biased in the discussion. And I also think those institutions should be made in ways, or networks, or whatever it is, in ways so that they can engage directly with policymakers. So we're talking about something that comes in between policymaking and authorities, for example, which is a vulnerable place to be, but I think it's important for our societies to have these kind of functions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lars. Fascinating stuff about social dimensions, technology, and wicked problems all wrapped up in Danish bows. Wonderful stuff. We could also talk about Danish. No, we won't. We won't talk about that. Are there any interesting questions for our interesting guest?
Comments?
Yes, please. If I can just pass that on to everyone. The question is basically, can we use more in the way of a chief social scientist to complement what we have in the way of a chief scientist?
We don't have a chief scientist in Denmark, actually. So I don't know if I'm able to answer, because I don't know how it works with such one, really. My point here is, I would say I wouldn't like to have one in Denmark. And the reason is that it puts science in a role where I'm not sure that science should be alone. And I think it's important that we have many other actors being advisors about science, and not only science. And I don't think that the remedy to that is to have a social chief scientist. I think the remedy to that is to have functions which bring in all different kinds of views in the discussion about how we want science and technology to be used.
Yes.
Recently, the Australian government introduced an electronic individual patient health record on the 1st of July. Now, this is a very good idea because if people are away from home with the usual doctor, the doctor they're consulting in the state can be located anywhere with his password and the patient's password, get into the medical record. And it's handy for hospitals. Unfortunately, the government introduced it as an opt-in system, which required individuals to register. At the same time, setting up this database, they also put in a new Australian government website. So you had to go through 2 websites to register. A very difficult process. Would you like to comment on how social engineering could have made that a little more practical?
First of all, I think we have electronic patient records in Denmark, and in fact, I'm a little ashamed to say we have 15 of them. And the reason was that there was so much political prestige that each county wanted one. And so I don't know if Denmark is the right, any Danish person is the right one to answer your question. But it's reduced now to 4, and they try to make them work together. In Denmark, we have a citizen registry, and the health, the electronic patient record is connected directly to that. So you cannot avoid being registered in the system. Yeah, and you can't even opt out. I mean, we have free free healthcare in Denmark. We paid all our tax. So it's seen as a right for everybody, and it's not a right you can check out of. You cannot opt out. So, and in a way, I think that's the way those kind of things should work. It seems to be a little strange that you have to have specific competences to be able to be in the electronic healthcare record system. So I'm quite sure that a good interactive process discussing how this system should be implemented and which functions it should have would not have ended up with that conclusion. I'm pretty sure about that. Okay. Because there would be many who would say, there would be patient groups for people with disabilities. There would be many who said, oh, what about us? We have members who are not able to use those systems. Or something like that. So, the complication would come in, and I don't think the solution to the complication would be that one.
Yeah, accessibility is a real problem around the world. A lady over here would.
I don't think so. In Denmark, we have a long tradition for what we call public enlightenment, which is the idea that if people are well educated there and we give them opportunities for discussion, debating, then we'll have better solutions and better democracy. The problem is that although we have that, politics are still politics. It's still a power game. So I think the picture of this Danish system is that we talk a lot about it, but in daily politics it's just a power game, as everywhere else in the world. But then probably we have a little advantage, which is that we can now and then refer to this cultural thing and use that as a push to have more interaction in policy processes. That's a little advantage we have in Denmark, which make it possible for Denmark to be a little island of experimentation in this area. I think that's one of the reasons that Denmark has advanced so fast, that we have this cultural background for doing it. But in daily politics, no. It looks like daily politics in Denmark look like daily politics looks everywhere.
Okay. There was a question over here somewhere. Oh, up. Talk. Please.
First of all, I think these, we have not to see these as processes that involve everybody. They are processes that involve some, and that's better than involving none. And so the people invited for such a citizen summit are representative examples of the population. So even, I would say, even in a country where you have 10 times or 5 times as Australia, 5 times as many people as Denmark, I don't think we need a 5 times bigger citizen summit. We just need to be careful that the people we invite represent the population in some way. Demographically, that there are youngsters there are families with children, there are elderly people, and geographically there are some from the west, some from the east, and so on. If you mix them right, then I think you can use a 500 people citizen summit in Australia as well, and only one. But in some issues, there is so much geographical diversity to how they should be attacked that it makes sense to make symmetrical citizen summits. For example, we have made the Danish healthcare system is connected to the 5 Danish regions, and these 5 regions have quite big autonomy with regard to how they make the healthcare system. So at some point they wanted to make citizen involvement about the future of the Danish healthcare system. And there we simply made 5 simultaneous citizen summits, each in one region, because it wouldn't make sense to mix them across the regions. So there are situations where it's quite important to have it distributed, I think.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions, 1 and 2.
Kind of a related question. You talked about a local example and local decision making about a global problem. But I know through worldwide views that you've also tackled that at a global level. Do you have any comments about dealing with global problems, both in relation to national engagements that have global dimensions, but also using collaborative democracy at a global level?
I think there are different dimensions to that question, because it's very much the old Rio process. Even though we work locally, we should think globally. And you have to bring that into local processes. So that's very much a matter of how you frame the issue. You should not pretend that a global problem is local just because you treat it locally. I think so. So it's important that you embrace the scope of the project, even if you work locally. But the other dimension of that is the reason we made the Worldwide Views project with these 38 countries involved and a 100-person meeting in each country, and they ran through the same process, all of these. They answered the same questions, they got the same information material all over the world. The reason we did that is because we see that there's a huge democratic vacuum around global negotiations. And in such global negotiations, everybody, not the least the NGOs, say that they speak on behalf of the citizens. But whoever asks the citizens in these kind of negotiations, they totally escape the normal democratic debates we have about things. So regimes for tackling biodiversity or tackling international trade or tackling climate change are made at a global level without any real connection to those that it is all about, the citizens, the global citizens. And that was the reason that we developed the worldwide views concept, simply to see if we could begin to introduce the idea of having a global discussion about global issues. Excuse me? I think it's much too early to say, and I also think which kind of impacts. COP15 in Copenhagen was an awful disaster, but I don't blame Worldwide Views. I think the impacts are on different levels. It's also a democratic impact. It's also about thinking of global negotiations in a little other way, and I think, yes, there it had an impact. We were invited by UN to make one about biodiversity, so here in October there will be a COP in India about biodiversity, and there we will present the results from a worldwide views on biodiversity that went on in the middle of September. So now we're beginning to work together with UN about these things, and that is impact, I think.
Okay, thank you. And our final question, yes.
How do you deal with people who don't actually know much about specific technologies in situations like this? Because you can have something like biotechnology and there'll be at least 15 people saying every problem that you've ever not had a solution for, this is the solution for it. And then the people that actually know how it's working at the present time say, look, it's not going to be viable for another 20 years. How do you do the information transfer, and how do you avoid people making dumb decisions based on their image of what something is, not on what it actually is?
Yeah, we put a lot of effort into making the information material, and we try to hit the point of information where they get enough, but we don't overload them. So they get what they need. And we take really, really serious discussions about if the information, we test the information material on different groups, and our fam take it home, throw it in front of our of the son and daughter, and say, read this, do you get anything out of it? And we do these kind of things. And I think that's extremely important, because if you overload and you begin to think people should be expert in order to be able to answer a question, I mean, that's exaggerating the things. They don't. They just have to understand what it's all about. That's one thing. Another thing is we often underestimate how clever citizens are. Don't underestimate that. Don't overestimate their level of information, and don't underestimate their intelligence. I mean, the citizens are a CEO in a global enterprise is a citizen. A professor is a citizen. A person who has a building company is a citizen. I mean, these are not, don't underestimate their intelligence. They're totally able to, and therefore they can cope with quite much information actually. So you can put a lot of things into the information material, and we do that, but we also are careful not to overload them.
Okay. I think we have to finish it up there. Can we once again thank our international guest, Lars Klüver.